A single mom takes a job caring for a reclusive, paraplegic millionaire, but her kindness stirs emotions he's long buried. As their worlds collide, past secrets and bitter enemies threaten to tear them apart. Can love and courage rebuild their shattered lives? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Destiny Williams stood at the iron gates of Harrison Manor, clutching her worn leather purse. Her son Jordan squeezed her hand tight, looking up at the massive house with wide eyes. At 12 years old, he'd never seen anything like it. "Mama, are we really going to live here?" Jordan whispered. "That's right, baby. Remember what we talked about? Mama's got a new job taking care of Mr. Harrison. This is going to be good for us," Destiny said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The gates opened with a creak, and Mrs. Peterson, the head housekeeper, walked down to meet them. She was a thin woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her eyes swept over Destiny's simple dress and Jordan's backpack with barely hidden disapproval. "You're late," Mrs. Peterson said. "Mr. Harrison doesn't tolerate tardiness." "The bus was delayed," Destiny explained. "It won't happen again." Mrs. Peterson led them up the long driveway, rattling off rules faster than Destiny could remember them. No noise after 8, no visitors, no touching anything in the main house without permission. Jordan needed to stay in their quarters unless specifically invited elsewhere. Their quarters turned out to be a small apartment above the garage. It had 2 tiny bedrooms, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. The furniture was old, but clean. For Destiny, who'd been sharing a one-room apartment with Jordan, it felt like a palace. "Mr. Harrison's physical therapy starts at 7 a.m. sharp," Mrs. Peterson said. "Don't be late. And remember, he's not in a good mood these days. Not since the accident." After Mrs. Peterson left, Jordan explored their new home while Destiny unpacked their few belongings. She looked at the photo of her mama on the nightstand, the woman who'd raised her alone and taught her to hold her head high no matter what. "I'm doing this for us, Mama," Destiny whispered, "just like you always did for me." At exactly 6:45. The next morning, Destiny walked into the main house. The kitchen staff barely looked at her as she passed. In the 3 years since his accident, James Harrison IV had gone through 6 caregivers. Nobody expected this one to last either. She found him in his bedroom, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the perfectly manicured gardens below. His wheelchair was positioned so he could see the sunrise, but his face showed no joy at the beautiful morning. "Good morning." "Mr. Harrison," Destiny said. "I'm Destiny Williams, your new caregiver." James Harrison turned his wheelchair slowly. He was younger than Destiny expected, probably in his late 30s. His face was handsome but hard like marble. His eyes were cold as they looked her over. "Another one," he said flatly. "Tell me, Mrs. Williams, how long do you think you'll last?" The last one made it 3 weeks before she quit. "It's Miss Williams," Destiny corrected gently. "And I don't plan on quitting, Mr. Harrison. Now, would you like to start with your exercises, or should we have breakfast first?" James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know what you're getting into. This isn't some regular nursing job. I'm not a nice man, Miss Williams. The accident didn't just take my legs, it took everything. My fiancé, my independence, my dignity." Destiny met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrison, you still have all those things except your fiancé, and if she left because of your accident, then you're better off without her." James stared at her, surprised by her directness. For a moment, his hard expression cracked, showing something vulnerable underneath. Then the wall came back up. "Let's get the exercises over with," he said. As Destiny helped him with his physical therapy, she noticed the photos on his dresser. They showed a different man, smiling, standing tall in expensive suits, with a beautiful blonde woman on his arm, the woman who'd left him after the accident. That put him in the wheelchair. "You're doing great," Destiny encouraged as she helped him stretch his legs. "These muscles are still strong." "Don't patronize me," James snapped. "I know they're useless." "Nothing about you is useless, Mr. Harrison," Destiny said firmly. "And I don't patronize anyone. My mama taught me better than that." For the rest of the session, James was quiet, but Destiny caught him watching her in the mirror. She pretended not to notice, focusing on her work with the same care and respect she showed all her patients. Later that night, as Destiny tucked Jordan into bed, he asked, "Is Mr. Harrison mean, Mama?" "No, baby," Destiny said thoughtfully. "He's just hurt. Sometimes when people are hurting, they forget how to be kind, but that doesn't mean the kindness isn't still in there somewhere." As she lay in her own bed, Destiny thought about James Harrison's eyes, how they'd softened for just a moment when she stood up to him. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for healing in this cold mansion after all. But first, she'd have to get through tomorrow. And based on what she'd seen today, that wouldn't be easy. James Harrison might have wealth and privilege, but he was a broken man, and Destiny knew from experience that healing a broken heart was much harder than healing a broken body. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, she smiled. Her mama always said God put people in each other's paths for a reason. Maybe that's why she was here, not just to help James Harrison with his physical therapy, but to help him remember how to live again. Little did she know her presence in Harrison Manor was about to stir up more than just James's frozen heart. The winds of change were beginning to blow through those gilded halls, and nothing would ever be the same again. 2 weeks had passed since Destiny started working at Harrison Manor. Every morning she helped James with his exercises, and every morning he tried his best to push her away with harsh words and cold stares. But Destiny noticed the walls were starting to crack little by little. "Your strength is improving," Destiny said one morning as she helped James with his arm exercises. "You're lifting more than last week." "What's the point?" James muttered. "I'll never walk again." "Maybe not," Destiny agreed, surprising him with her honesty. "But that doesn't mean you can't have a full life, Mr. Harrison." Before James could answer, Mrs. Peterson burst into the room. "Mr. Harrison, your brother Richard is here to see you." James's face darkened. "Tell him I'm busy." "Now, James," came a smooth voice from the doorway. "Is that any way to treat your only brother?" Richard Harrison walked in like he owned the place. He looked like an older version of James, but where James's eyes held pain, Richard's held calculation. He barely glanced at Destiny as he approached his brother. "I see you've got another new nurse," Richard said, making the word nurse sound like an insult. "How quaint." "Miss Williams is a certified caregiver," James said, his voice surprisingly sharp. "And we were in the middle of something." Destiny kept her face neutral, but inside she was shocked. It was the first time James had defended her to anyone. "Well, this is more important," Richard said, pulling out some papers. "The board meeting is next week. We need your signature on these documents." "What documents?" James asked, suspicious. "Just some routine business matters. Nothing for you to worry about." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You focus on your recovery." The way he said it made it clear he didn't believe recovery was possible. Destiny saw James's shoulders tense, saw the shame and anger flash across his face. "Mr. Harrison needs to finish his therapy session," Destiny said firmly. "Business can wait." Richard looked at her like she was something stuck to his shoe. "Listen, girl." "Miss Williams," James interrupted. "Her name is Miss Williams, Richard. And she's—" "Right. I need to finish my session. Leave the papers, I'll look at them later." After Richard left, the room was quiet except for the sound of James's breathing as he finished his exercises. Finally, he spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" Destiny asked, helping him back into his wheelchair. "Stand up to him. Most people don't." "I'm not most people, Mr. Harrison." Destiny smiled. "And neither are you." Later that day, Destiny was in the kitchen preparing James's lunch when she overheard Mrs. Peterson talking to the cook. "It won't last," Mrs. Peterson was saying. "These people never do. They don't understand our world." "These people?" Destiny stepped into view, her head held high. "Would you like to explain what you mean by that, Mrs. Peterson?" The kitchen went silent. Mrs. Peterson's face turned red, but she didn't answer. "I may not understand your world," Destiny continued, her voice steady, "but I understand kindness. I understand respect. And I understand that a man's worth isn't measured by whether he can walk or not." She picked up James's lunch tray and walked out, her back straight, just like her mama taught her. When she entered James's study, she found him staring at the papers his brother had left. "Something wrong?" she asked, setting down his lunch. James looked up, and for the first time he really seemed to see her. "These documents, Richard wants me to sign over control of most of my companies to him. Says it's temporary, until I'm better." He laughed bitterly, as if he believes. "I'll ever be better." Destiny sat down across from him. "Do you want to be better?" "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. Do you want to get better? Not just physically, but really better. Because I've been here 2 weeks, Mr. Harrison, and all I've seen is a man hiding from life. You're stronger than you think, but you have to want it." James stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the papers and ripped them in half. "Tell Richard I'll be at the board meeting myself next week," he said. "And Miss Williams?" "Yes, thank you." That night, as Destiny helped Jordan with his homework in their little apartment, she thought about the changes she was starting to see in James. Small cracks in his armor, moments of the man he used to be shining through. "Mama," Jordan said, looking up from his math book, "I saw Mr. Harrison watching us from his window today when I was playing basketball." "Oh?" Destiny tried to sound casual, but something fluttered in her chest. "Yeah. And you know what? I think he was almost smiling." Destiny looked out their window at the main house. One light was still on in James's study. She wondered if he was thinking about the board meeting, about his brother, about the life he thought he'd lost. "People can surprise you, baby," she said to Jordan. "Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them first." What Destiny didn't know was that at that very moment, James was sitting in his study, looking at an old photo of himself before the accident. But for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was thinking about the way Destiny had stood up to his brother, the way she spoke to him like a person instead of a patient, the way her smile seemed to bring warmth to every cold corner of the mansion. And for the first time in 3 years, James Harrison felt something he'd thought was gone forever: hope. The morning of the board meeting arrived with dark clouds hanging over Harrison Manor. Destiny helped James get ready, noticing how his hands shook slightly as she helped him with his tie. "You're going to do fine," she said, straightening his collar. "Just remember what we practiced." For the past week, they'd worked extra hard on his upper body strength. James insisted on using his regular wheelchair instead of his electric one for the meeting. "They need to see me as I am," he'd said, "not as some invalid they can push aside." "I haven't been to the office since the accident," James admitted, his voice low. "What if everyone stares?" "Let them stare," Destiny said firmly. "You're still their boss. You're still James Harrison IV. A horn honked outside. Richard had sent a car to pick up James. He hadn't expected James to actually come to the meeting, and his surprise phone call last night had been full of thinly veiled attempts to talk his brother out of it. "Miss Williams," James said as she helped him into the car. Would you come with me?" Destiny hesitated. She wasn't dressed for a corporate board meeting, just wearing her usual simple dress and practical shoes. "Please," James added quietly, "I need someone in my corner." That decided it. "Let me tell Jordan to go straight to Mrs. Chen's after school," she said. Their elderly neighbor had agreed to watch Jordan when needed. The ride to Harrison Technologies was tense. James stared out the window at the city passing by, his jaw set. Destiny noticed how people turned to look at the expensive car, never guessing at the drama unfolding inside. The company's glass tower stretched up into the cloudy sky. As they pulled up to the entrance, photographers started snapping pictures. Word had gotten out that James Harrison was finally returning to his company. "Vultures," James muttered. "They're just surprised to see you," Destiny said. "Show them you're not hiding anymore." James sat up straighter in his wheelchair. Destiny watched with pride as he navigated through the lobby, nodding at shocked employees who hadn't seen him in 3 years. She followed quietly behind, ignoring the whispers and stares directed at her. The boardroom fell silent when James wheeled himself in. Richard, who was standing at the head of the table, nearly dropped his papers. "James," he recovered quickly, "we weren't sure you'd make it." "And you brought your nurse?" "Caregiver," James corrected. "And yes, Miss Williams is here as my personal assistant today." Richard's eyes narrowed, but he forced a smile. "Well, shall we begin? We have some important matters to discuss about the future of Harrison Technologies." For the next hour, Destiny watched as Richard presented his plans. He wanted to sell off several of the company's smaller divisions, ones that James had built from scratch. His graphs and charts made it all sound reasonable, but Destiny saw how each proposal would strip more power away from James. Finally, James spoke up. "And what about the medical technology division?" Richard waved his hand dismissively. Yes, we're planning to shut that down. It's not profitable enough." "Not profitable enough?" James's voice rose. "That division develops wheelchairs and mobility aids for people who can't afford expensive equipment. It helps people like me." "James," Richard said condescendingly, "you need to think about the shareholders." "I am thinking about them." James pulled out his own papers, documents he and Destiny had spent nights reviewing together. "Our medical division might not make huge profits, but it creates goodwill. It gives us tax benefits, and most importantly, it helps people. The Khan board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Many of them wouldn't meet James's eyes. Furthermore, James continued, I've been reviewing all the company's records. Interesting how many decisions have been made without my knowledge while I was indisposed. Richard's face turned red. You were in no condition. I was injured, not incompetent, James cut him off. And according to our company bylaws, all major decisions require my approval as majority shareholder. One of the older board members cleared his throat. He's right, Richard. We should have waited for proper authorization. This is ridiculous, Richard exploded. Look at you. You can't even walk. How can you run a company? The room went dead silent. Destiny felt her hands curl into fists, but before she could speak, James did. I may not be able to walk, Richard, but I can think, I can lead, and I can recognize when my own brother is trying to steal my company. He turned to address the board. Ladies and gentlemen, I know I've been absent. That ends today. Harrison Technologies has always been about innovation and helping people. That's not going to change just because I use a wheelchair. Pride swelled in Destiny's chest as she watched James take control of the room. This was the man she'd glimpsed beneath all that pain and anger. Strong, capable, and unwilling to be pushed aside. The meeting ended with Richard storming out and the board voting to maintain James's full control of the company. As people filed out, many stopped to welcome James back, their respect evident in their eyes. In the car ride home, James was quiet again, but different this time. Finally, he spoke. I couldn't have done this without you, Miss Williams. I didn't do anything, Mr. Harrison. This was all you. No, he shook his head. You believed in me when I couldn't believe. In myself, you pushed me to be better, to try harder. He paused. And I think it's time you called me James. Destiny smiled. Only if you call me Destiny. That evening, as storm clouds finally broke and rain poured down outside Harrison Manor, something else was breaking too. The walls between a broken man and the woman who helped him find his strength again. But Richard's angry exit from the board meeting wouldn't be the last they'd see of him. In his office across town, he was already making phone calls, determined to prove his brother unfit to run the company. The real battle, it seemed, was just beginning. The weeks following the board meeting brought big changes to Harrison Manor. James started working from his home office, with Destiny helping him balance his therapy with video conferences and business calls. The cold mansion slowly began to feel more alive. One afternoon, while Destiny was helping James with his exercises, they heard the sound of a basketball bouncing outside. Jordan was practicing his shots at the hoop James had installed last week. He's getting better, James commented, watching through the window, but his form needs work. Destiny raised an eyebrow. I didn't know you played basketball. Was team captain in college, James said with a hint of sadness. Before I focused on becoming the perfect businessman. You know, Destiny said carefully, you could give him some pointers. That chair doesn't stop you from teaching. Before James could respond, Mrs. Peterson rushed in, looking flustered. Mr. Harrison, your mother is here. James's face went pale. What? She's supposed to be in Europe. Well, I'm not anymore, darling. Eleanor Harrison swept into the room like a queen, designer clothes perfect, jewelry gleaming. Her eyes went straight to Destiny. And who is this? Mother? This is Destiny Williams, my caregiver. Destiny? My mother, Eleanor Harrison. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Caregiver? Richard told me about you. Aren't you the one who helped James make that scene at the board meeting? I helped Mr. Harrison take back what's rightfully his, Destiny said calmly. James, darling. Eleanor turned to her son. Richard is beside himself. He says you're not thinking clearly, that this woman has undue influence over you. This woman, James said sharply, helped me remember who I am. Richard tried to steal my company while I was struggling. Where were you then, Mother? In Paris, Rome? Eleanor flinched. I couldn't bear to see you like this, my strong, handsome son confined to that chair. So you ran away, James finished, like Victoria did. Victoria, James's ex-fiancée. Destiny had heard the staff whisper about how she'd called off the wedding after the accident, claiming she wasn't ready to be a nurse instead of a wife. That's not fair, Eleanor protested. We all dealt with your accident differently. No, Mother, you didn't deal with it at all. But I'm dealing with it now thanks to people who actually care about me as a person, not just as an heir to the Harrison name. A basketball crashed through the window, sending glass everywhere. Jordan stood outside looking terrified. I'm so sorry, he called up. It slipped. Jordan. Destiny started for the door, but James caught her hand. It's okay, he said. Accidents happen. He raised his voice. Hey, Jordan, come up. Here, I want to show you something about your shooting form. Eleanor watched in shock as Jordan came in, apologizing again. James wheeled over to him with a warm smile. See, the key is in the follow-through, James demonstrated with his arms. My father taught me that when I was your age. Your father played? Jordan asked, forgetting his nervousness. He loved basketball. Mother, you remember how he'd spend hours teaching me? Eleanor's face softened slightly. He missed so many society events because of those basketball lessons. I thought it was a waste of time. It wasn't, James said quietly. It was the only time he was really my father, not just a businessman. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression as she watched her son teaching Jordan. Destiny saw tears in the older woman's eyes before she quickly blinked them away. Later, that night after Eleanor left and Jordan was in bed, Destiny found James in his study, looking at old photos. That's my father, he said, showing her a picture of a tall man teaching a young James how to shoot a basketball. He died when I was 15. After that, Mother pushed me to be the perfect Harrison heir. No more basketball, no more fun. Is that why you installed the hoop for Jordan? James nodded. Kids should be kids. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe it's time I remembered how to have fun too. Destiny sat down beside him. James Harrison, are you suggesting you might actually enjoy life with the right company? I might. His hand found hers, and this time neither pulled away. The moment was interrupted by James's phone buzzing. It was a text from his company's head of security. Richard had been seen meeting with Victoria, James's ex-fiancée. What are they planning? James wondered aloud. Nothing good, Destiny said. But whatever it is, you're not alone anymore. As if to prove her point, Jordan's basketball rolled into view outside the study door. James laughed, a real warm laugh that made Destiny's heart skip. No, I'm not alone, he agreed. For the first time since the accident, I'm really not alone. But across town, in a private dining room, Richard and Victoria were indeed planning something. Victoria picked up her wineglass, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming. So, she said to Richard, you really think we can prove James is mentally unfit to run the company? With your help, Richard smiled coldly, and the right evidence, we can prove he's being manipulated by his caregiver. After all, what kind of man lets a servant have so much influence? And what do I get out of this? A share of the company, and the chance to play the repentant fiancé, returning to stand by him in his time of need. Richard's smile widened. Once we get rid of Miss Williams, of course. Victoria touched the expensive engagement ring she still wore, the one James had given her before the accident. Well then, when do we start? The storm that had been brewing since the board meeting was about to break, and not everyone at Harrison Manor would be left standing when it was over. The Autumn Charity Gala was Harrison Technology's biggest social event of the year. James hadn't attended since his accident, but this year was different. This year, he had something to prove, and someone to prove it for. Are you sure about this? Destiny asked as she helped him with his bow tie. She'd never seen him so nervous, not even before the board meeting. I need to show everyone I'm still me, James said, that I can still lead this company. He paused, looking at her reflection in the mirror. I want you to come with me. Destiny's hands froze on his tie. James, I'm not exactly part of your social circle. I wouldn't know how to act at something like that. You'll be perfect, he assured her. Just be yourself, that's what helped me find my way back. Before Destiny could respond, Jordan burst into the room. Mom, you've got to see this. He was holding a tablet, showing a news website. The headline made Destiny's blood run cold. Harrison Technology's CEO under investigation. Claims of manipulation by staff member. The article was full of quotes from anonymous sources, claiming James was being controlled by an unqualified caregiver who had suspicious influence over both him and company decisions. This is Richard's doing, James said through clenched teeth. He grabbed his phone and started dialing. Wait, Destiny put her hand on his arm. This is what they want, to make you look unstable. Going after Richard now will only prove their point. So I'm supposed to just let them spread lies about you? No, Destiny said firmly. We go to the gala. We show everyone exactly who you are. A strong, capable leader who doesn't let anyone control him. Not Richard, not your mother, and certainly not me. James looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. You're right, but I'm still going to need you there. That evening, Destiny stood in front of her small closet, panicking. She had nothing. suitable for a fancy charity gala. But before she could call James to back out, there was a knock at her door. Eleanor Harrison stood there, holding a garment bag. "May I come in?" Surprised, Destiny stepped aside. Eleanor looked around the small apartment, her expression unreadable. "I saw that disgusting article," Eleanor said. "Richard has gone too far." She held out the garment bag. "I thought you might need something for tonight." Inside was a beautiful deep blue evening gown. "Mrs. Harrison, I couldn't—" "Eleanor, please." She sat down, looking suddenly tired. "I've been watching my son these past weeks. He's different, stronger, happier. At first I thought Richard must be right about you having some sort of agenda. But now I see the truth. And what's that? You gave him something we all failed to give him after the accident. Respect, dignity." Eleanor smiled slightly. "The dress was mine from years ago. I think it will suit you." Hours later, Destiny walked into the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton on James's arm. She felt every eye turn to them, heard the whispers start immediately. The dress fit perfectly, making her feel almost like she belonged in this glittering world. "James," a familiar voice called out. Victoria was walking toward them, stunning in a red designer gown. "I've missed you." James's grip tightened on his wheelchair's armrest. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "I'm still on the charity." "Bored, darling. And when I heard you were finally coming back to society." She leaned down as if to kiss his cheek, giving the photographers exactly what they wanted. Destiny started to step back, but James caught her hand. "Victoria, you remember my date for the evening, Destiny Williams?" Victoria's perfect smile faltered. "Your date? James, surely you can't be serious. After that awful article?" "The only awful thing," James said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "is how low some people will stoop to try to hurt those I care about." Across the room, Richard was watching, his face darkening. This wasn't going according to plan. James was supposed to be embarrassed by the article, distance himself from Destiny. Instead, he was practically announcing their relationship to all of high society. The evening proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. James handled business discussions brilliantly, proving to everyone that he was still very much in control of his faculties. Destiny charmed people with her genuine warmth, making it impossible for anyone to believe the article's claims about her being manipulative. Then Victoria made her move. During a quiet moment, she approached James alone. "I made a mistake," she said, tears in her eyes. "Leaving you after the accident, it was the biggest regret of my life. I was young, scared, but I never stopped loving you." James looked at his ex-fiancée, remembering how he once thought she was his whole world. "No, Victoria, you didn't leave because you were scared. You left because you cared more about appearances than love." "That's not true. I've changed." "Yes, you have," James agreed. "You've gotten better at lying." He wheeled himself around to face the room. "Everyone, may I have your attention, please?" The ballroom fell silent. Destiny felt her heart stop as James continued. 3 years ago, I thought losing the ability to walk meant losing everything. I pushed away everyone who tried to help me. I let my brother take advantage of my weakness. I believed someone like Victoria when she said she loved me, only to leave when things got hard." He beckoned Destiny to his side. "But then I met someone who saw past my wheelchair, past my anger, past my name and my money. Someone who reminded me that true strength isn't in our legs but in our hearts." Gasps filled the room as James took Destiny's hand. "So let me make something very clear to everyone here, especially those spreading rumors about manipulation. I, James Harrison IV, am in love with Destiny Williams, and anyone who has a problem with that can take their business elsewhere." The poor. Silence was deafening. Then from the back of the room came the sound of clapping. Eleanor Harrison was on her feet, tears streaming down her face as she applauded her son. Slowly, others joined in until the whole room was applauding. Victoria stormed out, already dialing Richard's number. Their plan had backfired spectacularly, but Richard wasn't done yet. If he couldn't prove James was being manipulated, he'd have to find another way to take control of Harrison Technologies. Later that night, as James and Destiny danced slowly to the last song, him in his wheelchair, her perched carefully on his lap, she whispered, "Did you mean what you said about loving me?" James touched her cheek gently. "With all my heart. You and Jordan, you've become my family." What they didn't know was that Richard was already setting his new plan in motion. Sometimes love isn't enough to stop someone determined to destroy everything in their path. The real test was still to come. The morning after the charity gala, Harrison Manor was buzzing with gossip. Every newspaper and website had photos of James and Destiny dancing, along with headlines about the CEO's surprising romance. But not everyone was celebrating their love story. "This is a disaster," Richard growled, pacing in Victoria's penthouse apartment. They were supposed to look scandalous, not romantic. Victoria sat at her vanity, removing her jewelry from the night before. "Maybe we're going about this the wrong way. If we can't attack James directly, we go after her," Richard finished, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Everyone has secrets, Victoria. We just need to find hers." Back at Harrison Manor, Destiny was helping Jordan get ready for school when Mrs. Peterson knocked on their door. The housekeeper's face was pinched with worry. "There are reporters at the gate," she said. "Dozens of them. They're asking about Miss Williams." Destiny's heart sank. She'd known going public would bring attention, but she hadn't expected it so soon. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I'll tell Mr. Harrison." She found James in his office, already on the phone with his PR team. "I don't care what they're saying," he was saying. "Destiny is part of my life now. Deal with it." He hung up and ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm sorry about this. I should have known they'd come after you." "We knew it wouldn't be easy," Destiny said, straightening his tie out of habit. "But I'm not ashamed of us, James." "Mom?" Jordan stood in the doorway looking scared. "The kids at school, they're saying mean things online about you and Mr. Harrison." James wheeled over to the boy. "Come here, Jordan." When Jordan approached, James put a hand on his shoulder. "People are always going to talk. What matters is what we know in our hearts. And I know that I love your mother and I care about you too." "Really?" Jordan's face lit up. "Really. In fact, I was thinking, how would you like to come to the office with me today? I could use an assistant for Take Your Child to Work Day." "But it's not Take Your Child to Work Day," Jordan said, confused. James winked. "It is if I say it is. I am the boss, after all." As they got ready to leave, Destiny noticed an unmarked envelope had been slipped under their apartment door. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 10 years ago. Her hands trembled as she read the headline, "Local Woman Arrested in Insurance Fraud Scheme." The article mentioned her mother, who had been falsely accused of insurance fraud while trying to get coverage for Destiny's college education. The charges had been dropped when the truth came out, but seeing it brought back painful memories. "What's wrong?" James asked, noticing her expression. "Nothing," Destiny said quickly, stuffing the article in her pocket. "Just junk mail." But as she watched James and Jordan leave together, both excited about their day at the office, guilt gnawed at her stomach. She should tell James about her family's past, about the scandal that had nearly ruined them. But would it change how he felt about her? At Harrison Technologies, James was showing Jordan around the office when his secretary rushed in. "Mr. Harrison, there's an emergency board meeting being called. Richard says he has important information about the company's future." James's jaw tightened. "Jordan, why don't you wait in my office? There are video games on the computer." The boardroom was tense when James wheeled in. Richard stood at the head of the table, looking triumphant. "Ah, brother, so glad you could join us. We were just discussing some interesting information that's come to light about your girlfriend's family." James's hands gripped his wheelchair's arms. "Destiny's family is none of your business." "It is when it affects the company," Richard said smoothly. He started passing out folders. "These documents show a pattern of suspicious behavior. Insurance fraud, questionable financial decision. Those charges were dropped." James slammed his hand on the table. "And you know it. But the scandal remains. Our shareholders are already nervous about your judgment, James. Dating an employee is one thing, but someone with this kind of background. Get out." James's voice was deadly quiet. "Excuse me? Get out of my boardroom. Get out of my company. You're fired, Richard." The room erupted in chaos. Bored. Members started talking all at once. Richard laughed. "You can't fire me. I'm your brother and I own shares, which I'm buying back effective immediately." James cut him off. "I've already spoken to the family lawyer. You've been working against company interests, trying to manipulate stock prices, meeting secretly with competitors. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate you while you were investigating Destiny?" Richard's face went pale. "You're choosing her over your own blood." "I'm choosing what's right," James said firmly. "Something you wouldn't understand." Back at Harrison Manor, Destiny was cleaning James's room, insisting on doing her job despite their changed relationship, when she found an old photo album. Inside were pictures of James and Richard as children, looking happy, playing together. Her heart ached. How had those loving brothers become such bitter enemies? And was it her fault? The door opened and Eleanor walked in. They were so close once, she said, seeing the album, before their father died. What happened? Money, power, the usual things that tear families apart. Eleanor sat down heavily. I thought Richard was protecting James after the accident. Now I see he was just protecting himself. I never meant to come between them, Destiny said softly. Oh, my dear, Eleanor took her hand. You didn't. You gave James back his strength. Richard couldn't handle seeing his brother become independent. Again. Before Destiny could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the park in an hour. Come alone, or everyone learns the real truth about your mother. Destiny stared at the phone, her hands shaking. She had a choice to make. Protect her mother's secret or trust in James's love. As storm clouds gathered over Harrison Manor, Destiny grabbed her coat. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones we have to make alone, but she was about to learn that facing your past doesn't mean you have to face it by yourself. The park was almost empty when Destiny arrived. Leaves swirled around her feet as she walked to the meeting spot, her heart pounding. Victoria stood waiting by the fountain, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day. I was starting to think you wouldn't come, Victoria said, smirking. What do you want? Destiny asked, keeping her distance. Just a friendly chat about your mother. Victoria pulled out a thick folder. Like how she didn't just face insurance fraud charges. There were other incidents too, weren't there? Destiny's throat tightened. Those were all mistakes, misunderstandings. Of course they were, Victoria's voice dripped with fake sympathy. Just like it's a misunderstanding that you're dating James. We both know what you really want. His money. You don't know anything about me or my feelings for James. No? Victoria stepped closer. Then why haven't you told him everything about your past? About how your mother took that job at the insurance company specifically to try to get coverage for your college. About the investigation, the trial, the community service. Destiny's hands curled into fists. My mother was desperate to give me an education. She made a mistake, but she paid for it. The charges were dropped. But the scandal wasn't, Victoria smiled coldly. Imagine what the Harrison Technologies shareholders would think. Imagine what it would do to James's reputation. Unless what? Leave him. Walk away now, and these documents never see the light of day. Stay, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of family you come from. What neither woman knew was that they weren't alone in the park. Eleanor Harrison sat on a nearby bench, having followed Destiny out of concern. She'd heard everything, and she'd recorded it all on her phone. Back at Harrison Manor, James was worried sick. Destiny wasn't answering her phone, and Jordan said she'd left in a hurry without explanation. She'll be back, Jordan said confidently, sitting in James's office. Mom always comes. Back? James smiled at the boy's face, but his gut told him something was wrong. Then his mother burst in, out of breath. James, you need to see this. She played the recording from the park. James's face darkened with each word. Call my car, he ordered. Now. At the park, Victoria was still pressing her advantage. Think about it, Destiny. You're not from his world. You never will be. Do the right thing and walk away. She's not going anywhere. They both turned. To see James wheeling toward them, determination on his face. Eleanor and Jordan were right behind him. James, Victoria stammered, what are you doing here? Stopping you from threatening the woman I love. He reached for Destiny's hand. My mother recorded everything, Victoria. Your blackmail attempt, your threats, it's over. Victoria's composure cracked. You don't understand. She's not good enough for you. Her family, James cut in, did whatever they had to do to survive and give their daughter a better life. Unlike you, who's never had to work for anything. Destiny squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you everything. I was scared. You don't have to be scared anymore, James said softly. Remember what you taught me? Our past doesn't define us. It's what we do now that matters. Jordan ran up and hugged his mother. Does this mean we can stay? Of course you're staying, Eleanor said firmly. She turned to Victoria. But you're not welcome at any Harrison family or business event ever again. And if these documents mysteriously leak to the press, we'll know exactly who to sue for harassment. Victoria's face twisted with rage. Richard was right, you've all lost your minds. No, James said. We've finally found our hearts. He looked up at Destiny. All of us. Later that evening, in James's study, Destiny finally told him everything. About her mother's desperate attempt to help her go to college, about the trial, about the years of struggling to overcome the scandal. That's why I became a caregiver, she finished. I wanted to help people, to make up for what happened. James took her hands in his. You've done more than make up for it. You've changed lives, mine especially. Even knowing everything. Especially knowing everything. He smiled. You're not the only one with a complicated family, remember? Suddenly Jordan burst into the study. Mom, Mr. Harrison, come. Quick, there's something weird on TV. They followed him to the living room where breaking news was playing. Richard Harrison was being led out of his office in handcuffs, accused of embezzlement and stock manipulation. The investigation you started, Eleanor explained to James. It uncovered more than we expected. He's been stealing from the company for years. James watched his brother being put into a police car, his heart heavy. He was so focused on destroying me, he destroyed himself instead. Destiny hugged him from behind. I'm sorry about your brother. Don't be. He made his choices. James turned to face her. Just like I'm making mine. Destiny Williams, will you and Jordan move into the main house with me? Not as my caregiver, but as my family? Jordan's eyes went wide. You mean we'd live here in the mansion? If that's what you want. James looked nervous for the first time. Both of you. Destiny looked at her son's excited face, at Eleanor's encouraging smile, at the love shining in James's eyes. She thought about how far they'd all come, about the healing they'd found in each other. Yes, she said, her heart full. Yes to everything. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, shining on Harrison Manor. The old house had seen its share of pain and betrayal, but now it was witnessing something new. The birth of a family built not on blood or money, but on love, trust, and second chances. But even as they celebrated, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Richard might be in jail, but his allies were still out there, and they weren't done trying to tear apart everything James and Destiny had built together. Moving from the garage apartment to the main house was like stepping into a different world. Jordan couldn't stop running from room to room, amazed that this was now his home. Destiny watched him with a mixture of joy and worry. Everything was changing so fast. This one's your room, James said, leading them to a beautiful bedroom suite. We can redecorate it however you like. My room? Jordan's eyes went wide. The whole thing, James smiled. Including that door over there. It leads to your own bathroom. While Jordan explored his new space, James showed Destiny to their room. Her breath caught at the sight of the massive bedroom with its wall of windows overlooking the garden. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Moving us in here, making us part of your world? James took her hand. You already are my world. The address is just catching up to reality. But reality had other plans. The next morning, James's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News of Richard's arrest had sent Harrison Technologies stock, prices plummeting. Shareholders were panicking. I need to go to the office, James said, rushing to get dressed. The board wants an emergency meeting. I'll help you, Destiny started, falling into her old caregiver routine. No, James caught her hand. You're not my caregiver anymore, remember? You're my partner. Besides, Jordan needs help settling into his new school. The private school had been Eleanor's idea. My grandson needs the best education, she'd insisted, already treating Jordan like family. But Destiny worried about how he'd fit in among the wealthy students. At the school gates, Jordan looked terrified. Maybe I should stay at my old school. Hey, Destiny straightened his new uniform. You can do this. You're still the same Jordan no matter where you go to school. But what if they don't like me? Then it's their loss, James said firmly. He'd insisted on coming with them despite the crisis at work. Just be yourself, buddy. That's more than enough. As they watched Jordan walk into the school, Destiny noticed other parents staring and whispering. News of their relationship was still fresh gossip in high society circles. Ignore them, James squeezed her hand. They'll get used to us eventually. But at the office, things weren't so easy to ignore. The board meeting was tense, with several members openly questioning James's judgment. First, you start a relationship with your caregiver, one board member said. Then your brother is arrested for embezzlement. The shareholders are losing confidence. My personal life is not the issue here, James said firmly. Richard's crimes are his own. I'm still the same CEO who's grown this company's profits every quarter. Are you? Another board member challenged. Because the James Harrison we knew would never have let his brother steal from the company for years. The James Harrison you knew was hiding from life, James shot back. I'm not hiding anymore, and I'm not letting anyone else steal from this company, including all of you who turned a blind eye to Richard's schemes because it was convenient. That silenced the room. James wheeled around the table, making eye contact with each member. I'm calling for a full audit of every department, every project, every account. If anyone else has been following my brother's example, now's the time to come clean. Back at Harrison Manor, Destiny was trying to make sense of her new role. The staff who used to treat her as one of them now seemed uncertain how to act. Around her, Mrs. Peterson, she caught the housekeeper in the hall. You don't have to act differently with me, I'm still me. But you're not, Mrs. Peterson said quietly. You're the lady of the house now. Before Destiny could respond, her phone rang. It was Jordan's school. Mrs. Williams, there's been an incident. You need to come right away. Destiny's heart raced as she rushed to the school. She found Jordan in the principal's office with a bloody nose and torn uniform. He got into a fight, the principal explained, with Charles Montgomery. Destiny recognized the name. Montgomery Industries was one of Harrison Technology's biggest competitors, and Charles was their CEO's son. He said Mr. Harrison was a cripple, Jordan said, his voice shaking. He said you were just after his money. I couldn't let him talk about our family like that. Our family. The words made Destiny's heart swell, even as she worried about the consequences. James arrived at the school minutes after she called him, having left the board meeting immediately. Are you okay? He asked Jordan, checking his nose carefully. I'm sorry, Jordan whispered. I messed everything up. No, you didn't, James said firmly. He turned to the principal. I want to know what disciplinary action you're taking against Charles Montgomery for bullying. Mr. Harrison, the principal looked uncomfortable. The Montgomerys are important benefactors. And I'm not? James's voice was steel. My father helped build this school. But more importantly, Jordan is my family. If this school can't protect all its students equally, we'll find one that will. On the drive home, Jordan was quiet. Maybe this was all a mistake, he said finally. Maybe we should go back to our old life. James stopped the car. Jordan, look at me. Family isn't a mistake. Love isn't a mistake. People might try to hurt us because they don't understand, but we don't run from that. We face it together. That evening, as they sat in the family room, Jordan doing homework, James reading reports, Destiny curled up with a book, Eleanor came in with serious news. I just heard from a friend on the hospital board, she said. Someone's been asking questions about Destiny's time there, about her relationship with James when she was his caregiver. Richard's allies, James growled. They're trying to make it look inappropriate. They're trying to destroy what we have, Destiny said softly. No, James took her hand. They're trying to destroy what they can't understand. Real love, real family, but they forget one thing. What's that? Jordan asked. We're stronger together than they are apart. Outside the manor gates, a car sat watching. Inside, Victoria was on the phone. Yes, everything's in place, she said. By the time we're done, James Harrison will lose everything. His company, his reputation, and his precious new family. The storm clouds that had been gathering were about to break, but this time the Harrison family, all of them, would face it together. The morning started like any other at Harrison Manor. Destiny was helping Jordan with his tie. Before school, when Mrs. Peterson rushed in, her face pale. Turn on the TV, she said. Channel 8 now. The morning news was running a special report. Scandal at Harrison Technologies. CEO James Harrison accused of misconduct. Victoria's face filled the screen, tears in her eyes. I couldn't stay silent anymore, she was saying. James was vulnerable after his accident, and this woman, his caregiver, took advantage of that. She manipulated him, isolated him from his family and friends. Now she's living in his house, spending his money. That's not true, Jordan shouted at the TV. But Victoria wasn't done. And the saddest part? She has a history of this. Her mother tried to scam an insurance company. Now Destiny's scamming James, using her own son to play on his emotions. Destiny's phone started ringing non-stop. Reporters had somehow gotten her number. Outside, news vans were already gathering. At the gates, James wheeled into the room, his face grim. The hospital board is launching an investigation. They're claiming you violated professional ethics by getting involved with a patient. But I didn't. Destiny's hands shook. We didn't start our relationship until... I know, James took her hand. But Victoria's gone to every news outlet in the city. She's painting you as a gold digger who preys on vulnerable, wealthy men. And she's not alone. Eleanor came in with more bad news. Charles Montgomery's father is calling for a shareholder vote to remove James from the company. He's saying James's judgment is compromised. They planned this, James realized. Richard might be in jail, but he still has friends on the board. They're using Victoria to destroy our reputation so they can take control of the company. Jordan looked scared. What are we going to do? Before anyone could answer, Destiny's phone lit up with a text. Meet me at St. Luke's Hospital in 1 hour. Come alone or watch your family fall apart. V. It's a trap, James said when she showed him. I know, Destiny replied, but maybe it's time I faced Victoria once and for all. Not alone, James insisted. We do this together. At St. Luke's Hospital, Victoria was waiting in the lobby surrounded by reporters. Her face lit up with fake concern when she saw James and Destiny arrive. James, darling, she stepped forward. I'm only trying to help you see. Save it, James. Cut her off. We know what you're really trying to do. Do you? Victoria's smile turned cruel. Take a look around, James. This is where it all started, where she sank her claws into you while you were helpless. The only person who tried to take advantage of James when he was vulnerable was you, Destiny said quietly. You left him when he needed you most. I left because I loved him. Victoria's composure cracked. I couldn't bear to see him like this, weak, dependent. The James I loved was strong, powerful. The James you loved was a fantasy, Destiny shot back. You never loved him. You loved his money, his status. When things got hard, you ran away. And you stepped right in, Victoria sneered. How convenient. No, a new voice joined in. She stepped up. Everyone turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen, James's former physician, walking towards them. I've been watching this circus on TV, Dr. Chen said, and I can't stay silent anymore. I was James's doctor during his entire recovery. I saw how Destiny cared for him, professionally, ethically, with genuine compassion. Their relationship didn't start until months after she stopped being his caregiver. More hospital staff began gathering. Nurses, orderlies, other doctors. One by one, they stepped forward to defend James and Destiny. She would read to him for hours. She believed in him when no one else did. She treated him like a person, not a patient. Victoria's face reddened as the cameras turned to capture each testimony, but she had one last card to play. What? About her mother? She demanded. The insurance fraud. You mean the charges that were dropped? Another new voice rang out. Eleanor Harrison walked in, accompanied by an elderly woman Destiny had never seen before. Mom? Destiny gasped. Rose Williams stepped forward, her head held high despite her simple clothes. My daughter told me what's been happening. It's time I faced my past too. Turning to the reporters, Rose spoke clearly. Yes, I made a mistake, trying to get insurance for my daughter's education. I was desperate to give her a better life. I paid for that mistake. But look at the woman she became, caring, hard-working, loving. She didn't need money or status to make her special. She just needed a chance to show her heart. James reached for Destiny's hand, and that heart saved me. Not just my body, but my soul. Victoria looked around wildly as her plan crumbled. This doesn't change anything. The shareholders have already heard from me, Eleanor stepped forward. I've spent the morning calling every major investor, telling them the truth about you and Richard, about how you tried to steal the company while my son was recovering, about how you've been working with Montgomery Industries to drive down our stock price. That's a lie. No, James said quietly. The lie was pretending you ever cared about me. The truth is standing right here. My family, my real family. Jordan, who had been watching everything from behind Eleanor, ran to hug his mother. The cameras caught it all. The boy's love, James's strength, Destiny's tears, Rose's dignity, Eleanor's pride. Victoria fled the hospital in tears, but the damage to her plan was done. The reporters had their story, not of scandal but of love, of a family brought together by hardship and made stronger by trust. Later that night, as the Harrison family sat together in the Manor's living room, Rose included, James made an announcement. The shareholders' meeting is tomorrow. I'm going to propose some changes. What kind of changes? Destiny asked. I want to expand our medical technology division, make it more accessible to people who can't afford expensive equipment. And he smiled at Rose. I want to start a foundation to help families with medical education costs. The Harrison Williams Foundation, Eleanor suggested. Perfect, James agreed. Because that's who we are now. Two families joined by love, working to help others find their strength. Outside, the news vans were finally leaving. The storm had passed, but it had left something beautiful in its wake. A family stronger than blood, bigger than wealth, bound together by choice and love. But in his prison cell, Richard Harrison watched the news coverage with growing rage. Victoria might have failed, but he had one last plan, and tomorrow's shareholders' meeting would be his final chance to destroy everything his brother held. Dear. The morning started like any other at Harrison Manor. Destiny was helping Jordan with his tie before school when Mrs. Peterson rushed in, her face pale. "Turn on the TV," she said. "Channel 8, now." The morning news was running. His special report. Scandal at Harrison Technologies. CEO James Harrison accused of misconduct. Victoria's face filled the screen, tears in her eyes. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," she was saying. James was vulnerable after his accident, and this woman, his caregiver, took advantage of that. She manipulated him, isolated him from his family and friends. Now she's living in his house, spending his money. "That's not true," Jordan shouted at the TV. But Victoria wasn't done. And the saddest part? She has a history of this. Her mother tried to scam an insurance company. Now Destiny's scamming James, using her own son to play on his emotions. Destiny's phone started ringing non-stop. Reporters had somehow gotten her number. Outside, news vans were already gathering at the gates. James wheeled into the room, his face grim. "The hospital board is launching an investigation. They're claiming you violated professional ethics by getting involved with a patient." "But I didn't." Destiny's hands shook. "We didn't start our relationship until—" "I know," James took her hand. "But Victoria's gone to every news outlet in the city. She's painting you as a gold digger who preys on vulnerable, wealthy men. And she's not alone." Eleanor came in with more bad news. Charles Montgomery's father is calling for a shareholder vote to remove James from the company. He's saying James's judgment is compromised. They planned this, James realized. Richard might be in jail, but he still has friends on the board. They're using Victoria to destroy our reputation so they can take control of the company. Jordan looked scared. "What are we going to do?" Before anyone could answer, Destiny's phone lit up with a text. "Meet me at St. Luke's Hospital in 1 hour. Come alone, or watch your family fall apart. V." "It's a trap," James said when she showed him. "I know," Destiny replied. "But maybe it's time I faced Victoria once and for all." "Not alone," James insisted. "We do this together." At St. Luke's Hospital, Victoria was waiting in the lobby, surrounded by reporters. Her face lit up with fake concern when she saw James and Destiny arrive. "James, darling," she stepped forward. "I'm only trying to help you see—" "Save it," James cut her off. "We know what you're really trying to do." "Do you?" Victoria's smile turned cruel. "Take a look around, James. This is where it all started, where she sank her claws into you while you were helpless. The only person who tried to take advantage of James when he was vulnerable was you," Destiny said quietly. "You left him when he needed you most." "I left because I loved him." Victoria's composure cracked. "I couldn't bear to see him like this. Weak, dependent. The James I loved was strong, powerful. The James you loved was a fantasy," Destiny shot back. "You never loved him. You loved his money, his status. When things got hard, you ran away. And you stepped right in." Victoria sneered. "How convenient." "No." A new voice joined in. She stepped up. Everyone turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen, James's former physician, walking towards them. "I've been watching this circus on TV," Dr. Chen said, "and I can't stay silent anymore. I was James's doctor during his entire recovery. I saw how Destiny cared for him, professionally, ethically, with genuine compassion. Their relationship didn't start until months after she stopped being his caregiver. More hospital staff began gathering. Nurses, orderlies, other doctors. One by one, they stepped forward to defend James and Destiny. She would read to him for hours. She believed in him when no one else did. She treated him like a person, not a patient." Victoria's face reddened as the cameras turned to capture each testimony, but she had one last card to play. "What about her mother?" she demanded. "The insurance fraud? You mean the charges that were dropped?" Another new voice rang out. Eleanor Harrison walked in, accompanied by an elderly woman Destiny had never seen before. "Mom!" Destiny gasped. Rose Williams stepped forward, her head held high despite her simple clothes. "My daughter told me what's been happening. It's time I faced my past too." Turning to the reporters, Rose spoke clearly. "Yes, I made a mistake trying to get insurance for my daughter's education. I was desperate to give her a better life. I paid for that mistake. But look at the woman she became. Caring, hard-working, loving. She didn't need money or status to make her special. She just needed a chance to show her heart." James reached for Destiny's hand. "And that heart saved me, not just my body but my soul." Victoria looked around wildly as her plan crumbled. This doesn't change anything. The shareholders have already heard from me. Eleanor stepped forward. I've spent the morning calling every major investor, telling them the truth about you and Richard, about how you tried to steal the company while my son was recovering, about how you've been working with Montgomery Industries to drive down our stock price. That's a lie. No, James said quietly. The lie was pretending you ever cared. About me. The truth is standing right here, my family, my real family. Jordan, who had been watching everything from behind Eleanor, ran to hug his mother. The cameras caught it all. The boy's love, James's strength, Destiny's tears, Rose's dignity, Eleanor's pride. Victoria fled the hospital in tears, but the damage to her plan was done. The reporters had their story, not of scandal, but of love, of a family brought together by hardship and made stronger by trust. Later that night, as the Harrison family sat together in the Manor's living room, Rose included, James made an announcement. The shareholders' meeting is tomorrow. I'm going to propose some changes. What kind of changes? Destiny asked. I want to expand our medical technology division, make it more accessible to people who can't afford expensive equipment. And, he smiled at Rose, I want to start a foundation to help families with medical education costs. The Harrison Williams Foundation, Eleanor suggested. Perfect, James agreed, because that's who we are now. Two families joined by love, working to help others find their strength. Outside, the news vans were finally leaving. The storm had passed, but it had left something beautiful in its wake. A family stronger than blood, bigger than wealth, bound together by choice and love. But in his prison cell, Richard Harrison watched the news coverage with growing rage. Victoria might have failed, but he had one last plan. And tomorrow's shareholders' meeting would be his final chance to destroy everything his brother held dear. The morning of the shareholders' meeting dawned bright and clear. James adjusted his tie in the mirror, while Destiny helped him with his cufflinks, not as his caregiver but as his partner. Ready? She asked. With you by my side. Always. They didn't know that across town. In the visiting room of the county jail, Richard Harrison was meeting with his lawyer. Everything's in place? Richard asked. Yes, the lawyer replied. The proxy votes are ready. Once the meeting starts, you'll be able to address the shareholders via video link. They won't be able to deny your evidence. Back at Harrison, Manor, Jordan was practicing his part for the meeting. James had asked him to help present the new Harrison Williams Foundation, and the boy was determined to make his new family proud. Remember, Eleanor coached him, speak from your heart. That's what matters most. Rose Williams watched her grandson with tears in her eyes. I never dreamed he'd have opportunities like this. He deserves them all, Eleanor said, hugging her new friend. Just like Destiny, deserves her happiness with James. The Harrison Technologies Conference Center was packed when they arrived. Shareholders, board members, and press filled every seat. Victoria sat in the front row next to Charles Montgomery and his father, all of them looking smug. James wheeled to the podium, his family standing proudly behind him. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin the official business, I have an announcement about the future of Harrison Technologies. Suddenly, the large screen behind him flickered to life. Richard's face appeared, streaming live from prison. I'm sorry to interrupt, little brother, but I have an announcement of my own. Security scrambled to cut the feed, but Richard's lawyer had hijacked the system. James gripped his wheelchair arms, staying calm. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard continued, I have proof that James Harrison is unfit to lead this company. Proof that he's been manipulated, not just by his former caregiver, but by our own mother. Eleanor gasped as Richard held up documents. These show that our mother knew about my financial dealings all along. She helped me hide them from James, until Destiny Williams turned her against me. This whole happy family act is just another manipulation. The room erupted in whispers. Victoria smiled triumphantly, but James simply wheeled forward. Is that all you have, Richard? What? Is that all you have? More lies? More attempts to hurt the people I love? James's voice grew stronger. Because I have something better. The truth. He nodded to his secretary, who distributed folders to every shareholder. These documents show every transaction Richard made over the past 3 years, every dollar he stole, every deal he made, behind my back. And yes, some people knew, but they were too afraid to speak up. That ends today. James turned to face the screen, showing his brother. You want to talk about manipulation? You took advantage of my accident to steal from this company. You tried to turn our mother against me. You worked with my ex-fiancée to destroy my new family, but you failed. Want to know why? He reached for Destiny's hand. Because real love can't be manipulated. Real family can't be bought. And real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Jordan stepped forward, no longer nervous. Mr. Harrison taught me that. He didn't have to care about me or my mum. He chose to, just like we chose to love him back. Rose spoke next. My mistakes taught my daughter compassion. Her love taught James to trust again. And now they're using their success to help others. That's not manipulation. That's grace. Eleanor faced the shareholders. I made mistakes too. I looked away when Richard was stealing because I was afraid of losing another son. But Destiny showed me that real love means facing hard truths. That's why I'm voting all my shares to support James's new initiatives. One by one, shareholders started standing up. Victoria and the Montgomerys watched in horror as their support crumbled. The Harrison Williams Foundation will provide medical equipment and education support to families in need, James announced, because everyone deserves a second chance, even you, Richard. On screen, Richard's face crumpled. For the first time, he looked ashamed. The vote is clear, the board chairman announced. James Harrison remains CEO with full support for his new initiatives. Later that evening, the family gathered in Harrison Manor's garden. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees as James raised a glass. To second chances, he said. To family, Destiny added. To love, Jordan chimed in. Eleanor and Rose shared a knowing look. Who would have thought their children's paths would cross like this? That pain could lead to healing. That loss could lead to love. James pulled Destiny onto his lap, his eyes shining. I have one more announcement, he said. Destiny Williams, will you marry me? Tears rolled down Destiny's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Jordan whooped with joy. Does this mean I can call you Dad now? James hugged him tight. I'd be honored. As the stars came out over Harrison Manor, the old house seemed to glow with new life. Through all the storms, all the battles, love had won. Not the superficial love of wealth and status that Victoria and Richard had prized, but real love, the kind that heals wounds, bridges differences, and builds new families from broken pieces. In his prison cell, Richard looked at the family photo James had sent him. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for healing even his darkest wounds. And in the garden of Harrison Manor, surrounded by the family they'd built together, James and Destiny shared a kiss that promised forever. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with a fairy tale beginning. Sometimes they start with a broken heart, a helping hand, and the courage to believe in second chances. The end.